So, what we're trying to look at here, and kind of our continuation of our theme on federal spending, we started off by looking at, how it is that funding decisions are made within the government. Then we turned to a discussion of the big things that money is spent on and how that contributes to deficits and the debt. And one of the things we learned from those two chapters, is that the bulk of the spending is all happening for, again, the big three: Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So it only seems right that we close off this discussion with a chapter that looks specifically at programs such as that. So, um, the notion here, well, this isn't even accurate anymore, so let's just get the accurate. Social Security actuarial report. Let's just look here. Do I want to really look at that? Okay, let's just look at the actuarial report. And sure. Not that I want to read this whole long document, although we all should as citizens of the United States. The Social Security Fund looks like it's going to run out of money in 2033 right now. So that's obviously earlier than 2040. 2033, that would mean in 11 short years it's going to run out of money. That's a pretty big problem. Um, I don't know how you. I mean, I'm sorry if I sound frustrated as I say this, but that's incredibly concerning when we think of all of the families that are served by the Social Security program. Now, who's all served by it? It's not just old people. You can start collecting, if you are old, you can start collecting Social Security at age 62. But the Social Security program also serves widows and orphans, right? So if you die and you have dependents, namely children, your children will receive a payment from Social Security until they turn 18. Um, Social Security as a program also covers the disabled. If you get disabled and you're declared disabled and unable to work, you can collect Social Security. Social Security is kind of the most important and fundamental programs um, in the United States system. I mean, I don't know um, if it doesn't exist. Um, that if it ceases, and again, we're going to look at this much more in week 7, as I kind of referenced before, but if it ceases to exist, it causes significant problems, and it's going to run out of money in 12 short years. Medicare. I don't know what it is for the Medicare actuarial report. Um, I don't know when they've run out of money or if they have already. So I'm just scrolling through this quickly here just to find out when it's going to run out of money. Okay, so 2026. 2026. 4 short years from now. Medicare. Who's that covering? Well, as it even says here on this page here, 62.6 million people. The US has about 5 times that, so almost 20% of the people in the United States are covered by Medicare. That's a lot of people that are depending on this as their healthcare system. And yet it's going to run out of money in 4 years. And then we've got state and local government pension funds that don't have enough assets. I can only speak the best about the ERS, the Employee Retirement System. That's the pension system for state of Hawaii employees. And it only has about half the assets needed to cover the I think there is a chart here. EUTF Hawaii. Go on their site. I think we can see. Yeah, they're not going to tell us easily how much they've run out of money, but yeah, my understanding is that they've got about half the money. So, what is the source of the problem? Well, it's not really this. I mean, I'm not sure what the is the source of the problem. The fact that people are becoming entitled to these benefits at such an early age. Maybe I don't know what the authors are really implying here, but that's not really the issue here. Still, Social Security and even Medicare are not covering individuals for an incredibly long period of time 10 years, maybe 15 years. Most individuals do live long enough to get paid out more than they put into the system. And it provides at least a little bit over poverty level existence. The poverty rate among the elderly is incredibly low. But that's not the so this is not the issue here with what's the source of the problem. The source of the problem truly is that not enough taxes are being collected. We pay Social Security taxes as part of our income, and yet that money, that tax rate, has not changed since the early 1980s. Neither has the retirement age changed since the 1980s. To solve this problem, you need to do one of two things. You either need to raise the retirement age, or you need to collect more in taxes for the Social Security system. There's only two ways to get around this. Well, I guess there's another way to get around it. The other way to get around it would be you could let Social Security invest in other kinds of assets, but that's a little bit dangerous. And we'll talk about that more in week 7. Medicare. That problem, obviously, we know is coming up much, much sooner here. We need to come up with a solution as well for, how the only way to really resolve this would be you tell people that they can't receive this health care until they're much older, or you collect more in taxes. Again, I'm not sure really what the other options are. In terms of the underfunded pension promises, like so, for instance, to me as a state employee, there the problem is a little bit different. And it's not me as a state employee trying to pass on blame. As a state employee, I pay about 9% of my income goes as a contribution to the pension. It's not me as the employee. Rather, the problem is actually my employer, the state of Hawaii. When economic times get tough and the economy is in a recession, that is when the state, to save money, withholds its contribution. But that's exactly the time that it should be making its investment, its contribution, so that it can be invested. Instead, the state of Hawaii, as my employer, is not putting in the money. That's me as an employee complaining about my employer. Um, in terms of the benefit that I, as an employee, receive, yeah, it's pretty generous. It's providing mm, about 50% income replacement. And then when you add Social Security onto that, you get almost 75% income replacement, which basically means that I don't need to, I personally, or for my family, don't need to save separately for retirement. I mean, I am um, based on my 9-10% that I'm contributing every month, basically forced savings. Um, the only other way to get around this um, would be you could tell state employees to retire later, which I suppose they could. But then you also hurt future generations in terms of when they're going to get their jobs. Um, it's as we try to understand um, as we try to understand these pension programs, it's important to take into account a pretty important distinction, and that is the difference between a defined benefit pension, DB pension, or a DC pension, a defined contribution pension. Most of the world out there, when we talk about things like 401ks, things like that, those are what are called defined contribution programs. Essentially, what they are is that you save your money, you pick the investments that the money should go into, and then when you retire, you've got this account balance that you then draw down however fast or however slow you want. A defined benefit program is different. So, like for my pension, I'm putting in like 9-10%, but I don't have an account balance, right? So, I mean, I have the there's an equivalent of a 401k for if you work for like a nonprofit. And when I worked for a private university, I have a defined contribution pension with them, and that like has a dollar amount, right? My wife works for a private employer. She's got a 401k. It has an amount of money. I don't have that. All I have with the state of Hawaii for my defined benefit program, there's an equation, and that equation depends heavily on how many years of service I put towards this place. There's a calculation, an equation that determines how much I get. And I get that same amount every month until my wife and I both die. That's the amount that we get. And then we're dead, and then the pension goes away. The defined contribution program, you could say, I retire, I've got $500,000 because of the saving I did, how much I saved, where I put those investments, and then I've got to decide how I'm going to spend it down. It's a different mindset for each of these. I just basically said this, so I'm not sure I need to repeat it here. Um, yeah, I mean, it's this. Don't get me wrong. The state pension, the Hawaii state pension, yes, it is generous. On the other hand, um, the pay is pretty bad. So, in some sense, if you have a state employee in the family, you kind of get the benefits from that person's job, and then from the private employee, the spouse who works for a private employer, you're kind of relying on their income from that person. So that's kind of the way that it's structured. Um, so again, I'm just putting in 9-10% of my salary, um, goes to the state, the employee retirement system, the ERS, and when I retire, I get an amount based on an equation, solving an equation, and then my spouse gets that. I'll probably die first, and then my spouse gets it until she dies. Again, defined contribution is different. Put money into an account. I have an amount that actually I own, and then I've got to spend it down. Um, which one's better, which one's worse? That's a little hard. Um, there's no hard and fast rule. Um, there's a sort of a simplicity, for instance, to the defined benefit pension that I have. Um, we can, as a family, we know we have something that we could rely on no matter how the economy does, for that certain amount. But at the same time, it's not an incredibly high amount, right? Whereas my wife, who works for a private employer, she can like choose all these investments. She can take on more risk. If the market does really well, she could even retire early. None of those options are open to me. Plus, um, if I ever left my employment with the state, I get nothing. Um, like, yes, if I work long enough for the state, you have to work 10 years for the state to become eligible for the pension. If you work long enough, then you become what's called vested, and you actually get to collect on it. um, but if you leave before that 10 years, you don't get anything. Defined contribution, you basically, for the most part, you own it when you put the money, after you put the money into it. um, and there are risks with each kind of employment, um, or each kind of pension. With the defined benefit, the problem right now is that I cannot control is that I can tell you what the equation says I should have when I retire. The problem is I don't know that the state is going to be able to honor it. Um, and the problem is that back in the 1960s, um, there was a company that offered a pension, and then the company failed, and the Congress passed legislation to ensure that if the company you worked for failed, that this government agency would pay you your pension instead. It's called the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, PBGC. Um, and that's what it's referring to there. If your employer will go bankrupt, the Pension Guarantee Trust. It's not really called that. I don't know why they're calling it that. It's the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, PBGC, insures against that. Um, but the PBGC, that government organization, is actually almost bankrupt as well. So there's not a lot. You're really depending on the employer that offers you that defined benefit pension, that they're not going to go back on their promise. And for me as a state employee, that doesn't apply to me either. So if the state just says one day, sorry, all you state employees, no pension for you, we ran out of money, I don't have a lot of recourse. There is a clause in the Hawaii State Constitution that does say that once a state employee is offered something, you can't take it back. And so it's part of the Hawaii state constitution. But keep in mind that the state constitution can be is revised, can be revised every 10 years. So, you know, can't really depend on it. I mean, I can try to depend on it, but I can't at the same time. Um, defined contribution, the problem there is you never know if you saved enough. Um, and if you live a very long time, you will outlive, no matter how much you save, you will outlive your money if you end up living a long time. So these are difficult risks to bridge. And that's even if you spend a lot of time thinking about it. Most people don't spend a lot of time thinking about how to save for retirement. Which is why we then get Social Security and Medicare. Social Security and Medicare provide both the income and the health care for those who are old. The problem again is that those programs are running out of money. Um, so if they're running out of money, um, how badly are they running out of money? Well, they're running huge deficits that they're paying for out of their trust funds. And those trust funds are quickly becoming exhausted. And if we don't change any aspects of the program, obviously Social Security is going to get much, 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 much worse. Medicare, not so much, because we've actually done a pretty good job at controlling those costs. But Social Security is different. People are just living longer lives. Um, and part of the problem is that we're just getting older. The population in the United States is just getting older. We have more and more people who are 65 and older who are drawing money out of Social Security that are depending on individuals ages 20 to 64 who are contributing to the program. So you've almost got twice as many old people relying on younger people that are paying into the system. So it's just running, and that's very different than it used to be back in the 1960s when you had many more, like during the baby boom generation, when you had so many of the baby boom generation working. The problem now is that the baby boom generation is retiring or retired at this point. Um, we just aren't. I mean, what does this slide tell us about the nature of the problem? What this slide tells us is that we're just not collecting enough money. We need to increase the taxes that Social Security collects, and we're not doing it. And you can't really solve the problem by just raising the retirement age. You have to collect more taxes. For the pension fund, same thing. You need to collect my contribution. Well, my contribution should be greater, but also the state should be paying its portion because right now it's not. Um, so yeah, the state and local pension funds are underfunded. In some cases, it's because employees aren't paying enough, but most of the time, it's actually because the state isn't covering its portion. That's significant, right? State debt. I'm just trying to see here if I can see here. Pension. Yeah, I thought this was a article not too long ago. So about $14 billion, and it's not going to cover that funding gap until 2045. Um, oh, and I should have mentioned this too. So as a state employee, We also have a retiree health care plan. I don't think we make a contribution towards it. It's largely paid for just as a general retiree. And so obviously that unfunded liability is even greater. All of that is because, let's just see here. Well, I guess let's just highlight that part right there, right? This isn't against Ige. This is just he's doing what others did, other governors before him. Times are tough in Hawaii. Ige said the state needs more money. $1.5 billion it has to cut out of its budget in the next 18 months. And what do you think it took what do you think it decided not to pay out? It shortchanged those payments, so it's not going to pay them out. And that sucks. For depending on it, right? It's hard to depend on it if the state isn't making its contribution. And the state's not alone; other states do the same thing. Before I got my job in Hawaii, I had a few job offers when I got my job offer in Hawaii. And the other job offer I had was with University of Illinois. And so I can tell you with that pension, it was even far, 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 far more generous. You could retire as early as 55 years of age, and you didn't even have to make like a contribution like I have to make here. It was very, very generous. And Illinois government tried to get out of it, as we can kind of see on the slide here. But it ended up going to the state Supreme Court, and Illinois basically can't get out of the debt. And that was by the state Supreme Court. I suspect that in other states, the same thing will be attempted and tried, and it will kind of depend on the Supreme Court for the individual state to declare whether the state government can do that or not. And obviously, Illinois is among the worst, where the liabilities are quite great. Largely based on unsustainable promises, with the big one being the city of Chicago. My wife, again, who's in finance and sells bonds to some clients, her firm, this is a few years ago, actually asked her to reach out to people who owned bonds for the city of Chicago, state of Illinois, and redeem those bonds before they were declared in distress. So the city of Chicago, New York City, San Francisco, Boston, all very high amounts of debt. All that you can try to do in this situation is try to grow yourself out of the problem. Just try to grow the GDP more, or try to have the investment rate grow more so that you can grow yourself out of the problem. It's just very difficult to do. You the only thing I can really say to kind of close out this chapter is, as tough as the decisions are, we actually just need our policymakers to sit down and rethink both the funding source and who is eligible for Medicare and Social Security. Because we haven't had that discussion in over 40 years, 4 decades. So we need to come together and talk again about who those programs should serve and how are we going to ensure that they have enough money. And you can't do it in the short bit of time you have before people have to try to get elected. You have to set up a special committee to talk about this where people aren't worried about getting reelected, because otherwise there's no real easy way to solve this problem.